Chapter 21 The Enigmatic Crown Prince. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The key player in this whole thing is Wilhelmina. Joseph had been turning this over in his head for a while. If the Patriot Party can stall things, and we use Wilhelmina right, maybe move some troops to the Franco-Prussian border, Prussia might just pull back their forces. I'll put together a detailed proposal and send it to the Marquis of St. Priest officially. The Queen nodded. All right, I'll decide if we keep helping based on what the Minister of War says. Then Louis XVI, usually so quiet, chimed in. No need to dip into the treasury. I'll personally donate 600,000 livres to support the Patriot Party. He gave Joseph a quick, encouraging smile. Brienne visibly relaxed and bowed to Louis XVI. Thank you for your generosity, Your Majesty. With the King's contribution, the state treasury can hold off on funding the Patriot Party for now. We'll see how things are going in the Netherlands in a couple of months before deciding if we should continue. He turned to Queen Mary. Your Majesty, does that sound okay? She nodded. Good. Let's move on to the next item. Yes, Your Majesty. Brian glanced at the Crown Prince, a little nervous he might cause trouble again. Luckily, Joseph didn't say anything more about the reduction plan, and it went through without a hitch. The cabinet meeting then covered a few other minor issues and started to wrap up. Queen Mary signed the last couple of documents and asked Brian without looking up, Archbishop Brian, I hear the tax bill is hitting some snags. She was talking about the new tax reform bill the government had been pushing since the start of the year. It mainly involved allowing the aristocracy to pay land tax like everyone else, letting grain be transported and traded freely, getting rid of the corvée, labor tax, and raising stamp duties. The whole point was to bring in more money and fix the national debt. It would actually help regular folks, but the nobles were dead set against it and had blocked it for the better part of 6 months. That's why the last finance minister got canned. Brian nodded, looking grim. Your Majesty, the High Court is holding up the new bill. I'm hearing they're likely to reject it outright. French law said the High Court had to register the tax reform bill before the king could sign it and make it official. The aristocracy had a stranglehold on the French courts, so this bill, which threatened their interests, was stuck in limbo. Queen Mary sounded weary. You know our financial situation. That tax bill needs to pass, and fast. Yes, Your Majesty. I'll do everything I can. Joseph shook his head to himself. He knew how this played out historically. Brian never got the bill through. In the end, Louis XVI lost his cool and, pushed by some hardliners, stripped the High Court of its power, kicked out the stubborn judges, replaced them with a royal puppet court, and forced the bill through. But the big nobles immediately jumped on this, whipping up public opinion and painting Louis XVI as a tyrant who was trampling on the law. This sparked a tax resistance movement across France and through the country into financial chaos. Louis XVI, who had no control over the narrative, had to bring back the exiled judges and restore the High Court's power. Then, the High Court promptly canned the new tax reform bill. The worst part was that the nobles were now sure they could beat the king, so they became even more arrogant and overbearing. Louis XVI, with no other options, called a meeting of the Estates General, hoping the common people would back him up and help him take on the nobles, but the nobles used the Estates General to stir up riots, which happened to coincide with the Great Famine of 1788. Then things went completely off the rails and the French Revolution kicked off. Joseph looked at Brian and thought, you think you can get the nobles to accept a bill that makes them pay more taxes? Good luck with that. If you wanted to reform the tax system, you first had to smack these nobles down and show them the power of the monarchy. Only then would they pay their taxes willingly, plus, you had to control the narrative. These big nobles were masters at twisting the truth, stirring up public opinion, and screwing up the country for their own gain. Only if the French people heard what the government had to say and understood what was really happening could they avoid being manipulated by the nobles. He took a deep breath. Taking the job of assistant to the finance minister was the first step. But changing the course of history wouldn't be easy. Whether it was the stubborn nobles, the church, or the capitalists, he wouldn't hesitate to go after anyone who got in his way. Alright, that's all for today. The Queen's voice pulled Joseph out of his thoughts. He stood up with the other ministers, bowed to the King and Queen, and started to turn to leave. Joseph, hold on a minute, Queen Mary said, stopping him. Joseph turned back and sat down. Once the other ministers had left the room, the Queen smiled at him. Joseph, you've done a great job reforming the police. The Saint-Antoine district is now the safest place in Paris, hands down. She paused and sighed. But this police reform has to end. Why? The Queen said earnestly, after your reforms, the police salaries are too high. It's all falling on the city government. You were paying them out of your own pocket before, but the city can't afford it. We still need to rely on civilian patrols for the regular citizens' safety. Joseph jumped in without missing a beat. Public safety is critical. I think it shouldn't just end, it should be expanded throughout Paris and even the entire country. As for the money, don't sweat it. As soon as I take over, well, get involved in managing the finances, the treasury will be overflowing in no time. Queen Mary looked at her son, intrigued. And where are you going to get all this money? Joseph hesitated, thinking that steam engines, blast furnace steelmaking, rubber, mining, cement, and even munitions could each rake in tens of millions of livres, but I can't just tell her all that, He hesitated for a second and picked a few things the Queen might find acceptable. For example, finance, real estate, luxury goods. Trust me, I've got this. Queen Mary frowned, sounding skeptical. After a moment, she said, here's what we'll do. I'll give you 6 months. If you can solve the police salary issue, the police reform can continue. If not, we go right back to the way things were. Deal. I don't think it'll take me 6 months. Louis XVI checked the time. Almost lunch time. Nothing should get in the way of lunch. He led them toward the royal dining room. In the hallway, Joseph remembered something and asked Queen Mary, Mom, is there anyone you'd recommend for Paris police chief? Police chief? You should ask Count Mono. Yeah, he'll take my advice. The Queen looked surprised, then quickly realized what was going on. You blackmailed him with Guizot's situation? Absolutely not, Joseph said innocently. I just helped him feel a little more secure. Chapter 22 Planning the Police Academy, please vote for me. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Queen Mary gave her son a curious look and chuckled, so that's why he suggested you be the finance minister's assistant today. How did you work your magic on him? Seeing Joseph's knowing smile, she let it go. After a moment, she offered, there's Besançon. He's coordinated trade in several provinces, led the mounted police to crack down on smugglers, and he's good at coordination and management, a capable guy. And Friant, he used to command a company in the Flanders Brigade, was my bodyguard, and now he's in charge of infantry recruitment. He's great at training and developing tactics. She added, I can vouch for their loyalty. Who you choose is up to you. Joseph nodded. Okay, I'll reach out and then decide. He didn't know these guys at all, but being new to politics and without his own team, he had no choice but to ask his mother for help. It hit him, using the opportunity to control the police, he could invest in building a police academy and recruit civilian trainees. This would train professional officers and reduce the nobles' influence on law enforcement. Plus, he could offer courses like management, business, journalism, law, and hand-pick the best talent to cultivate his own loyalists. Suddenly, he pictured it, a group of high-ranking government officials saluting him and calling him Dean with genuine affection. Politically, the military academy model was a proven success. The restaurant doors creaked open. Joseph looked up and saw they'd arrived. The huge dining room was already packed with nobles eager to watch. Ever since Louis XV, the French royal family's activities had been open to the public, eating, sleeping, entertaining, even childbirth. Joseph felt his head swim as the Queen pulled him to the spacious, opulent table. The master of ceremonies tapped the floor with his staff, and a trumpet sounded. It was the standard procedure for serving a dish, music, several people passing it around, a lot of fancy moves before you could actually eat it. Joseph suddenly remembered something and leaned in to whisper to the Queen, "Oh, if the Minister of the Navy comes to you about cutting the shipbuilding plan, send him to me. I'll convince him." Queen Mary looked surprised. She'd actually been worried about this. Castries was stubborn and intense. If his budget got cut, he'd probably be on her case for a month. She nodded, grateful her son was saving her from that headache. Meanwhile, on the west staircase of Versailles, the Minister of Justice turned to the Duke of Orleans and said, "Judging by the Crown Prince's actions, do you think he's leaning toward the British?" That the Duke narrowed his eyes. "It might be Austria's doing. If the British change their policy toward France because of the fleet reduction, that could be very bad for us." 2 miles away in the square, Mono, the Minister of the Interior, and Nico, the Minister of Household Registration, walked side by side in the sun. "At least the Crown Prince is definitely anti-Prussian," Mono said. "Those who are against both Prussia and Britain are hardliners. Those who aren't against either are anti-war," Nico sighed. "What we should worry about most is someone who's anti-Prussian and pro-British. Let's be honest, a monarch like Peter III would be a disaster for France." He was referring to the last Tsar of Russia. He had idolized King Frederick II of Prussia since childhood. Even when Russia had the upper hand in the war with Prussia, he forced the Russian army to retreat and signed a treaty with Frederick II that was extremely unfavorable to Russia. After the cabinet meeting, everyone worried the Crown Prince was a British fanboy. Mono shook his head slightly. "I've spoken with him. He's very wise. His suggestion to reduce the navy might just be because warships cost too much, not an attempt to cozy up to the British. Let's hope so." News from the cabinet meeting quickly reached the office of the British ambassador to France. After Ambassador Harriet heard that the French Dauphin was advocating stopping all warship construction and taking a hard line on Prussia, he thought for 3 minutes, then called in a trusted aide and gave him careful instructions. After his man left, Harriet wrote a detailed report and sent it back to England. The lunch, with its ridiculous rules about which bite to take first, was finally over. Louis XVI happily took Joseph to his workshop to show off his latest creation, a handmade brass safe. Then he left. When Joseph returned to his palace, Dr. Lamarck was already there, questioning Perna about the Crown Prince's recent health. Although Joseph had his own doctor, Perna still insisted on checking on him daily. Seeing Joseph return, Lamarck hurried forward, bowed, and said, "It's wonderful to hear that His Highness's condition is stable. It must be the miraculous salicin." Joseph returned the bow with a smile. "And Dr. Perna's care?" Perna muttered almost inaudibly, "I don't even have a medical license yet." "Perna's skills are better than most doctors," Lamarck said, praising his assistant, then pulled out a small glass bottle and looked at Joseph eagerly. "Mr. Larceny and I made several batches of salicin glycosides. The purification level is getting better and better." Joseph took the bottle, looked at the beige powder inside, and complimented, "You truly are one of Europe's best biologists and medical scientists. The purity is quite high." No, I didn't do anything." "You told me the purification process," Lamarck said modestly, then added excitedly, "I've been distributing salicin for free in the New Bridge district, and it's working wonders. It's not just pneumonia, it seems to help with fevers from all kinds of diseases. It saved the lives of 7 or 8 people in just a few days." He paused, then said hesitantly, "Your Highness, Mr. Rasseni and I talked about raising money to produce salicin on a large scale. This medicine could save countless lives. What do you think?" "Of course, half the profits would be yours." He whispered, "But, most of the poor people who are sick can't afford much. Raise money to make medicine?" Joseph shook his head. "In that case, the production and sale of the medicine will be influenced by investors." Lamarck looked surprised. "What do you mean?" "I'll fund the construction of a pharmaceutical factory to produce salicin. Joseph thought of the homeless man he'd seen slumped in the corner of St. Anthony district. We'll cap the profit at 3%, and maybe even let people trade willow bark for the medicine. Lamarck and Perna looked at him, awestruck. Your Highness, you're so kind. May the Lord bless you. Chapter 23 Fantasy Battleship, please collect. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Lamarck hesitated, then turned to Joseph. Your Highness, just a reminder, this workshop needs about 50,000 to 60,000 livres to get off the ground. At a 3% profit margin, it'll take a while to recoup that investment. Joseph smiled, waving his hand dismissively. That 3% is just a buffer for the unexpected. I'm not looking to get rich off this medicine. He wasn't just being naive or throwing money away, he had a solid plan. Salicin, as a medicine, could save lives, and selling it cheap felt like the right thing to do, but it wasn't just a fever reducer. It was also a potent cosmetic. Fast forward to the 21st century, and salicylic acid, salicin's derivative, was a key ingredient in acne treatments and anti-aging products. There's a saying, who are the big spenders? Women, of course. With the right packaging and marketing, salicin-based skincare could easily fetch 10 livres a bottle, and women would be fighting to get their hands on it. That's incredible, Your Highness, Lamarck said. On behalf of the everyday Parisians, thank you. Joseph waved it off. It's nothing, really. Lamarck, eager to get this miracle drug into circulation, jumped right in. Your Highness, I know a spot that's perfect for a workshop. Take a look. Joseph considered it. Purifying salicin isn't rocket science. Building from scratch seems like a waste of time. We'd be better off just buying an existing pharmaceutical or chemical reagent company. Imang, Joseph's valet, piped up. Your Highness, if I may. Go ahead. I recall there's a perfume workshop in the royal family's holdings. It's been losing money for ages and they're about to sell it. It might fit the bill. You're a lifesaver. Joseph said, nodding. Do you know what they're asking for it? Around 26,000, I think. Before he could finish, Joseph smacked his forehead. Wait a minute, it's royal property. Why pay for it? I'll just ask the Queen for it. Queen Mary, hearing that her son wanted to make affordable medicine for the people, immediately agreed and instructed her lawyer to get the paperwork done. Within half an hour, the perfume workshop was officially in the Crown Prince's name. Joseph wanted to check it out, but a servant announced that the Marquis de Castries was waiting to see him. Joseph had to leave the pharmaceutical factory plans to Lamarck and head to the drawing room to meet the Minister of the Navy. In the grand living room, Castries bowed respectfully and got straight to business. Your Highness, the Queen has asked me to discuss the new warship program with you. I believe we shouldn't scale back. Joseph interrupted with a smile. Marquis de Castries, before we go there, let me ask you this, why do you want so many warships? To take on the British, of course. The minister declared, his voice steely. To crush their precious fleet, reclaim our stolen colonies, and make them eat humble pie, just like they did to my grandfather. Joseph nodded. And do you believe that even with unlimited funding for shipbuilding, you can guarantee a victory over the British? Castries was prepared for this. If we team up with Spain and use the right strategies, we stand a chance. A slim one, Joseph countered bluntly. And frankly, they're better at naval tactics than we are. Castries' expression darkened, but he wouldn't back down. How do we know if we don't try? Joseph gestured for him to have some tea, his tone even. What if the Navy had a warship that could hit 20 knots, pack 25 42-pound cannons and 30 24-pound cannons, with an ironclad hull? Added to our existing fleet, do you think we could take on the British then? That's a pipe dream. Castries chuckled. If we had a ship like that, I could make the British Navy soil their pants. Chapter 24 Steam Engines and Carronade Cannons. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Joseph locked eyes with the Navy minister, his voice serious. I guarantee construction on this fantasy battleship can begin within a year, 2, or at most 3. Castries was stunned. Are you serious? How is that even possible? Joseph took a sip of tea. Absolutely. I'm completely confident. Then stop wasting money on the current warships. In 2 or 3 years, tops, they'll be obsolete. I won't keep you waiting long. I'm heading to Brest soon, and you'll see for yourself. He could be so sure because the steam engine was already a reality, and the craftsmanship was well established. The only problem was low power due to flawed design. But that was no issue for Joseph. He'd seen far more advanced steam engines than even what's refined model. Castries felt his head spinning, caught between disbelief, excitement, and wild ideas. He was momentarily speechless. Joseph reiterated, first, tell the shipbuilding bureau to get started prepping the workforce and raw materials. Building new ships is a complex undertaking. Okay, Castries said, realizing he was starting to believe the Crown Prince. The idea of that dream battleship was just too tempting. I'll go to the bureau right now. He fixed Joseph with a piercing stare, his voice trembling slightly. Your Highness, please, keep your word. You have my word. Joseph paused, remembering something else. Oh, and while you're at it, get the craftsman working on a large caliber, short-barreled cannon. Huh. Basically, a souped-up mortar, Joseph explained. Something that can fire over 60 pounds of shot, but with a barrel and powder charge less than half the size of a regular cannon. It'll be lightweight and relatively easy to manufacture. Castries looked surprised. Your Highness, that cannon sounds powerful, but the range must be terrible. What good is it? Joseph just smiled. I'll explain everything when we're at the Brest shipyard. This, of course, was the Carronade that would later wreak havoc on the French Navy at the Battle of Trafalgar. The current French naval strategy was based on a flawed premise, a fixation on range. The thinking went, if I can hit you from farther away than you can hit me, I'm guaranteed to win, right? But that's where theory and reality diverged. In the age of sailing battleships, maneuverability wasn't great, and maintaining maximum range on both sides was difficult. Besides, solid cannonballs lacked serious punch at long range, making it hard to inflict real damage in actual combat. Most battleships ended up fighting at close quarters, trying to blast holes in the enemy's hull. At that point, range was irrelevant. Caliber was king. The British realized this, ditched the long-range idea, and focused on developing a large caliber, short-barreled heavy cannon, the Carronade. But in this reality, the French Navy would be the first to wield this devastating weapon. Joseph repeatedly went over his plans with the Navy minister, ensuring he was on board, before personally escorting him from the room. Before Joseph could even catch his breath, Imam hurried over, bowing slightly. Your Highness, the Marquis of St. Priest requests an audience. Joseph hadn't expected the Minister of War to be so impatient, but all the better. He wouldn't have to write that document after all. Chapter 25 The First Pot of Gold. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Unlike his meeting with the Admiralty Minister, Joseph met the Marquis of St. Priest in his study. He dismissed all the servants, and the guards outside the door retreated about 30 feet. After Joseph thoroughly explained his plan, the Minister of War exclaimed, "How do you know she's in Nijmegen?" Of course, I saw it in a documentary. Joseph thought, but he feigned mystery, saying, that's a secret, but the intel is solid. St. Priest frowned, then finally nodded with hesitation. While feasible, it's a huge risk. Even the best spy can screw up. Carelessness could trigger a war. Joseph smiled. Don't worry. Even if it leaks, as long as Wilhelmina is safe, Prussia will play along. Their economy's in the dumps too, and they absolutely don't want a war with France. The Minister of War pondered, then stood. This is too big. I have to run it by Her Majesty the Queen before I can sign off. Of course. Joseph walked him to the door, then casually said, "Marquis Saint-Priest, shouldn't you be thanking me for this?" That the Minister of War looked surprised. The Crown Prince got the budget from the Netherlands and crafted the whole operation. He'd been so focused on execution, he'd forgotten the thanks. He nodded, embarrassed. "You're right, Your Highness. I owe you a debt of gratitude." Joseph grinned. "Then, how about a little something for my trouble?" "Name it, Your Highness." "Well, how about 20 of your top spies?" Saint-Priest almost choked. "Your Highness, you're still a kid, and you're already tougher than a loan shark," he thought. * 20 spies, and top-notch ones at that. "You think I find those on the street?" He grimaced. "Your Highness, the whole army doesn't have 20 top spies. 18. 2 tops. 15. 3. That's all I can do. 12. Final offer." They haggled back and forth until Joseph walked away with 3 top spies and 8 average ones from the Minister of War. It wasn't a lot, but it was a start. This would be the cornerstone for his French CIA. It was shaping up to be a long day. As soon as Saint-Priest left, 2 people recommended by Queen Mary arrived. Joseph grilled them, getting a feel for their personalities and skills. Considering their preferences, he decided to make Besançon the Paris police director. It was a management job, after all. Friant was good too, and Joseph wouldn't waste him. He appointed him dean of the soon-to-be-open Paris Police Academy, with Joseph himself, naturally, as principal. Friant's experience training recruits would be perfect for shaping new police officers. "So, your main job once you're in place is to roll out police reform across Paris," Joseph told Besançon. "I've had people compile all the rules, regs, and reorganization plans into a handbook. Follow it, and you'll be golden. Oh, and St. Anthony district's been pretty quiet lately. You can pull some people from there to assess the other districts. If you need more, I can get the guards to help." Kisaud, listening in, twitched. Ever since the Crown Prince started these police reforms, the guards were turning into glorified errand boys. Nathanson took careful notes. "Your Highness, I've looked into police reform before. Just the salaries for a reorganized Paris police force will be around 50,000 livres a month. Add in uniforms, equipment. City Hall can't possibly afford it. The Paris City Hall's police budget was only 8,000 livres monthly." Joseph waved it off. "Don't sweat the money. I'll allocate you 50,000 livres now, and we'll do that monthly from here on out." "Yes, Your Highness." Joseph turned to Friant. "Your workload will be heavier. First, you need to find a location for the police academy. Somewhere remote, with cheap land. Also, we need teachers. Right now, all we have are experienced officers from St. Anthony district, and that's not enough." Friant immediately said, "Your Highness, I know a lot of retired veterans, even military officers. They could handle the formation and combat training." "Excellent." Joseph beamed. Military training standards were way higher than the police. "Contact them ASAP. We'll pay them municipal rates, plus 30%. "Yes, Your Highness. We also need to recruit teachers in finance, trade, journalism, and law. The police academy will offer those courses." Friant looked puzzled. "Why teach that at a police academy?" Nathanson, quicker on the uptake, said, "I think Your Highness means that to catch criminals, you need to know how they operate. When I started chasing smugglers, I didn't even know how to calculate tariffs or what goods were easiest to transport. I found nothing for months. Then I seriously studied smuggling, and after 6 months, I finally caught my first batch." "Exactly," Joseph said approvingly. "The police need to be more professional than the criminals to effectively deter and combat crime." Friant, who'd never heard of these advanced ideas, was blown away. He nodded vigorously, scribbling in his notebook. Joseph went over more details. gave Friant 20,000 livres for startup costs, and sent them on their way. Back in the palace, the royal accountant immediately presented 2 expense receipts, asking Joseph to sign. Joseph looked at the total of 70,000 livres and sighed. He'd had over 200,000 livres to his name. He'd given 20,000 to the police, 10,000 to Lamarck for supplies for the pharmaceutical factory. Now he was down to just over 100,000. Money went fast. He needed to find a way to make more, or he'd be broke in no time. He immediately thought of his plan to make cosmetics with salicin. Who knew that tinkering with fever medicine would be his ticket to riches? He sent the accountant away and said to Iman, "Order some things for me." The attendant grabbed pen and paper and waited. "Yes, Your Highness. 50 kilos of glycerin, 1 kilo of rose essential oil, 500 7-ounce glass bottles, and the same number of small wooden boxes sized to fit the bottles." Hot stamped the boxes. Joseph, struggling to name things, paused, then remembered the SK2 fairy water his roommate had bought his girlfriend back in his previous life. He liked the name, so he said, "Hot stamp angel water. Everything has to be top quality, so don't worry about the price." "Yes, Your Highness. I'll get right on it." Chapter 26 The Terrible Debt. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The next day, on his first day as the Chancellor of the Exchequer's assistant, Joseph arrived early at the South Palace of Versailles, where the Chancellor's office was on the second floor. As he hurried in, he couldn't help thinking of how he used to rush to clock in at his old job. He used it as an excuse to skip the elaborate breakfast ceremony, grabbing some bread, grilled fish, and vegetable soup instead, saving a ton of time. When Iman pushed open the door to the Chancellor's office, they found Brian slamming his fist on the table, yelling angrily in a low voice. "These selfish jerks. They preach about equality and justice, but all they see are gold coins. Don't they realize they're strangling the country's finances?" Joseph stepped forward to write and knocked over brass pen holder. "Archbishop Brian, who's got you so riled up?" he asked. The secretary whispered, "Your Highness, yesterday afternoon the High Court formally refused to register the tax bill." Brian sighed, frustrated. "Those greedy nobles are going to destroy France for the sake of a little land tax. Don't they know they'll go down with it?" As a relatively upright priest, that was about as harsh as he could get. He turned to Joseph, apologetic. "Your Highness, I'm sorry you had to hear that." Joseph waved his hand. "It's all right, Archbishop. I get it." He picked up the thick stack of bills returned by the High Court and saw the not registered stamp. "Archbishop Brian, what's the next move?" Brian closed his eyes, pinching the bridge of his nose, and said dejectedly, "We can only compromise, seek support from the church, and try to convince those selfish, greedy bastards." Joseph shook his head inwardly. Those high priests were also nobles. Expecting them to follow the teachings and save the world was a pipe dream. Seeing Joseph's silence, Brian sighed again. "Actually, I know it may be useless. God help France." Joseph frowned. He had to get involved in this tax bill. This wasn't just about nobles not wanting to pay taxes. It was a power play, a test of the monarchy. Historically, Louis XVI used every trick in the book to get the bill passed, but the nobles, with the courts and public opinion on their side, beat him. They saw Louis as weak and became even more brazen in their power grabs, throwing the country into chaos. Joseph needed to stop that trend. He had to get the bill passed fast, crush the nobles' arrogance, and remind them who was in charge. It seemed tough, but it wasn't really. The nobles' power came from the High Court's right to register bills and their ability to sway public opinion against the royal family. The French courts were notoriously corrupt, and everyone had dirty laundry. He could find leverage there. As for public opinion, compared to the internet and new media tricks of the 21st century, the nobles' attempts were like adults bullying kindergartners. Joseph looked at Brian, as if comforting a helpless old man. "Archbishop, it's not necessarily as bad as you think. We might get the bill passed in a few months." "I hope you're right, Your Highness." Brian nodded and trudged to his office on the west side. I'll see if there's any room for concessions in the tax provisions. Joseph returned to his office on the east side and asked his assistant for internal financial data. He dove in. The more he learned about France's finances, the more alarmed he became. He wondered how the previous finance ministers had kept the country from going bankrupt. France had a total debt of 2 billion livres, mostly national debt. 60% was held by French citizens, 40% by foreigners. The interest rates on these bonds were 8% to 12%, meaning 200 million livres went to interest alone. The country's annual revenue was only 500 million. With 40% going to interest, there was no chance of paying off the principal. Historically, it wasn't until after the Great Edict, when the National Convention seized church property and the emperor racked up war spoils, that this massive hole was plugged. Besides the national debt, there was also short-term bank debt, which was even scarier. These were short-term loans taken out in the country's name when they ran into cash flow problems. They were usually paid back after selling national bonds, but the interest rates were a whopping 15% to 25%. This short-term debt was under 200 million livres, but the monthly interest payments were over 1.8 million, and even though it was supposed to be short-term, the country's financial state meant they had to borrow new money as soon as the old debt was paid off, effectively making it long-term debt. As Joseph worried about the debt, his assistant knocked and saluted. Your Highness, Laborde Bank says due to unforeseen business changes, the loan negotiations need to be postponed. They haven't set a new date yet. Joseph nodded, not too concerned. Thank you. I understand. He remembered that one of his main duties as assistant to the finance minister was discussing short-term loans with banks, basically borrowing money to pay off old debts. He looked at the list of important items his assistant had prepared and saw loan negotiations with Laborde Bank at 2 p.m. This money was primarily intended to cover a 6 million livre, one-year treasury bond coming due in a month. The plan was to borrow from two banks and pay them back with bond proceeds in 2 months, at interest rates of 18% and 19%. Banking must be a gold mine in this era, he muttered. In the 21st century, those rates would be considered loan sharking. Chapter 27 Sharp Sword, please vote for me. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Joseph smiled to himself. If I get the chance, I'm definitely opening a bank. He finished reviewing the financial reports, pushed aside the overflowing inbox, rubbed his aching shoulders, and started wading through the new tax bill, over 30 pages, packed with provisions. The more Joseph read, the more he frowned. The people who drafted this were too clever by half, burying the important stuff under mountains of irrelevant details. As a 21st century guy with a good education, even he was getting a headache. How could they expect ordinary people to understand any of this? And it seemed like they were worried the nobles would block the bill, so they'd slipped in a few tax breaks that favored the aristocracy and screwed over the common folk, but they hadn't anticipated that this minor concession would become the nobles' main line of attack. The common people, barely understanding the bill's actual details, were swayed by propaganda claiming it would hurt them, and joined the opposition. The core of the bill was actually about stripping away the nobility's land tax exemptions, finally making them shoulder some of the nation's financial burden. Plus, it allowed for the free transport and sale of grain, eliminating tariffs between regions to boost the economy. The whole thing reeked of Louis XVI's weak, compromising approach. It was like sugar mixed with crap, trying to please everyone. He ended up pleasing no one. Joseph grabbed his pen and started crossing out all the tax provisions that unfairly targeted ordinary people and small businesses. Politics is all about picking your battles and choosing your allies. With those changes, the bill wouldn't be a bargaining chip for the aristocracy, it'd be a weapon against them. He gave it another careful look. He was about to hand it off to his assistant for a clean copy when he realized it was already getting dark. Forget it, tomorrow. He stretched, tossed the marked-up bill into the drawer. Treat others as you'd want to be treated. Unless it's an emergency. He wasn't about to force anyone to work overtime. Stepping out of his office, he saw Iman approaching with a maid. Your Highness, Her Majesty the Queen is hosting a gambling party in the Mars Hall and invites you to attend. Joseph almost laughed. It felt so strange for a mother to drag her son off to gamble, but he knew it was normal entertainment at Versailles. Even the Sun King, Louis XIV, specifically ordered the palace to hold these activities to improve relations between the monarch and his subjects. Joseph nodded. "All right, I'll head over now." He went back to his room to change into lighter, more festive clothes, then followed the Queen's maid to the Mars Hall. Even from down the hall, you could hear the noise and upbeat piano music. The guard at the door bowed to Joseph and pushed open the massive doors. Queen Marie, playing baccarat beneath the huge portrait of Louis XIV, spotted her son immediately and waved, beaming. "My dear, you're finally here." Joseph hurried over and bowed. The Queen was clearly in high spirits. "I hear you've been working hard all day. Come relax and have some fun. Guess what? I just won 10 hands in a row. I hope you have the same luck." When the surrounding nobles heard the Crown Prince was here, they all stopped to greet him. The young women in their silks were practically glowing, smiles dripping with flirtation. Joseph watched the nobles fawning over Queen Mary, the Queen flushed and giggling over her winnings, and he was reminded of something Zweig wrote: "She was too young to know that all the gifts given by fate have already been marked with a secret price." Just as Joseph was lost in thought, Mono, his face powdered white, scurried over, pulled him along, and gestured to a nearby table. "Your Highness, your timing's perfect. We were just short a player. Come join us." A young noble at the card table turned pale and vanished faster than you could blink. Fully grasping the short a player situation, Joseph couldn't refuse the invitation, so he followed the minister and sat down at the card table under the painting of the god of war. A servant promptly brought wine and juice. 2 tens, Count Paps announced, laying down his cards. The game was a bit like Crazy Eights, but with aces as the lowest card and kings as the highest. Joseph took a glass of juice, looked at his hand, and shook his head. Pass. Seeing the mountains of gold and silver coins on the table, he couldn't help thinking about France's 2 billion debt. Then he glanced at the cabinet ministers opposite him, casually throwing around gold like it was nothing. He shook his head and smiled bitterly. Maybe a major stroke of luck was in order. Worrying about the national debt, and not being much of a card player, he quickly lost 3 games in a row, dropping 12 gold coins. Nearby, a dozen or so aristocratic girls were glued to his table. Seeing that the Crown Prince seemed distracted and unhappy about losing, they clenched their fists and gritted their teeth. Several sprung into action, some cornered their fathers or uncles, shooting them death glares. Others approached their brothers, pretending to ask about the game while secretly twisting a chunk of flesh on their arms. Technically, French court etiquette forbade throwing a game, but the 3 people at Joseph's table had decided to abandon that rule without a second thought. Mono split a straight flush 6 through 10 and got an 8. Count Pappus looked at the Crown Prince's 7, squeezed the 10 and queen in his hand, and firmly declared, "Pass." Joseph's luck suddenly turned. He started winning no matter what he played. One game, the highest card was only a jack, a hand full of single cards, and he still won. The winning streak got him fired up, and he lost track of time. Finally, feeling tired, he glanced at the clock. It was 11:30 p.m., he quickly stood up and said goodnight to his poker buddies, telling Yimang to gather his winnings as he dragged his weary body toward his palace. Once they were out of the hall, Iman followed, whispering excitedly. "Your Highness, you won a total of 156 crowns. 0.1 ECU was equal to 6 livres, meaning Joseph had won nearly 1,000 livres in a single night." "Not bad," Joseph said, feeling a surge of satisfaction. "I didn't do any real work all night, and I made a fortune." But then he remembered the monstrous 2 billion debt and started doing some mental math. At this rate, it would take him about 550 years to pay it off. Joseph sighed. To pay off that kind of debt, he needed more than just personal money-making schemes. He needed to leverage the Industrial Revolution in France. That was the only way to solve the financial crisis, so, he needed to get the ball rolling on steam engines, textile technology, and the financial and patent policies to support them. Joseph was deep in thought about the Industrial Revolution when he suddenly heard a gurgle from his stomach. He shook his head and laughed. He'd been so focused on winning all night that he'd forgotten to eat dinner. He looked up and realized the kitchens were right there in the corridor, the lights still on. Apparently, there was a chef on duty. His palace was pretty far away. He didn't know how long it would take for food to be delivered. He might as well grab a bite here. With that, he headed towards the kitchen. Note 1, from the biographical novel Marie Antoinette, The Portrait of an Average Woman by Austrian writer Stefan Zweig, November 28, 1881 to February 22, 1942. Currently, 34 generous readers have invested in this book. With 66 more major investors, this book will get an investment recommendation and greater exposure. Because recommendations are so crucial during a new book's launch, I'm asking you to invest in this book, which will also bring you dividends. The earlier you invest, the higher your returns. Chapter 28 Meeting Sadako at Night, Please Vote for Me. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Seeing this, Imang hurried forward, opened the kitchen door, and waited respectfully for the Crown Prince. Captain Kisode was caught off guard when His Highness suddenly headed for the kitchen. He quickly waved to the two guards and followed. Joseph stepped inside and found a spacious kitchen. 6 or 7 huge cutting boards were pushed together in the center, filling the air with the smell of fish and spices. Various ingredients and utensils were scattered around, but only half the lights were on, and no cooks were to be seen. He thought that even without dances or celebrations, there should be at least a few royal chefs on duty at night. What was going on? Joseph walked further in, circling a massive locker. He faintly heard a rustling sound coming from the corner. A shelf stacked with pots and metal spoons blocked his view, making it difficult to see what was happening. Joseph wondered what the chefs were doing hiding in the corner. Were they planning a late-night poker game? Confused, he rounded the wooden frame and saw a short man standing with his back to him under the light, wearing a rumpled white robe and sporting long, messy black hair. Then Joseph noticed a large, tilted wooden board in front of the man. It was riddled with knife marks and surrounded by a disturbing amount of bloodstains, made even more unsettling by the flickering candlelight. The man in the white robe seemed completely absorbed in his task. Only when he heard Joseph behind him did he whirl around. Joseph's eyes widened. The man's front was splattered with blood, and he held a menacing black and red knife. His face was hidden behind his tangled hair, but a pair of round, glowing green eyes were just visible. And clinging to the strands that reached his waist were sticky bits that looked like entrails. Joseph's mind raced, adrenaline flooding his system. His immediate thought was, holy crap. It's like something out of The Ring. He leaped backward, slamming into the spoon rack, which clattered noisily. Ignoring the pain, he was about to turn when Imang appeared, short sword in his left hand, pulling the Crown Prince behind him with his right. Protect His Highness. Imang yelled. Kisode, realizing something was terribly wrong, rushed forward, drawing his sword and standing beside the attendant. Guards, he shouted, turning to Joseph. Your Highness, please get out of here. More than a dozen of the Crown Prince's personal guards poured in, suppressing their fear of what seemed like some ghostly apparition. They raised their guns, pointing them at the figure in the corner as if their lives depended on it. That's when Sadako finally moved. She threw the knife into the air, burying her fingers in her long hair, squatting down with her head in her hands, and letting out a piercing scream. Startled, Joseph peeked out from behind Imang, suddenly thinking that this Sadako looked vaguely familiar. Hey, knock it off, he said, trying to communicate. Who are you? Hearing his voice, Sadako seemed stunned. She looked up through the gaps in her hair, her voice trembling. Your Highness? The king? Ha! You know me? Sadako nodded frantically. It's me. Your Highness, I'm Purna. Please, don't shoot. Kisode cautiously stepped forward, brushed the woman's hair aside, and sighed in relief. He sheathed his sword, turned, and said, Your Highness, it is indeed Miss Purna. Joseph, face-palming internally, looked at Purna and then at the blood-soaked board behind her, asking incredulously. You? What are you doing here? I. Purna glanced at her hand, realizing the knife was missing. She explained, avoiding his gaze, well. I'm helping Mr. Wollaston butcher the meat. As she spoke, she frantically wiped the blood on her apron, grabbed a hair tie from the floor, pulled back her long hair, and hastily curtsied. Your Highness, the Crown Prince. Joseph, noticing the blood on her face, pulled out his handkerchief and motioned for her to use it. Meng quickly took the handkerchief and offered it to Purna. She accepted it cautiously, dabbing her face until an ivory complexion emerged, and on that delicate face, a pair of light green eyes shone like emeralds. Dark, thick lashes framed those eyes, and a pair of pear-shaped dimples beside her red lips added to her sweetness. This was nothing like the horrifying Sadako from before. Joseph was taken aback, then smiled and said, I've never seen you dressed like this. You look beautiful. He glanced at the wooden board behind Purna, where a small animal was neatly pinned with nails. It was a rabbit, with clean abdominal incisions and well-separated organs. Curious, he asked, Are you practicing anatomy? Purna gasped and waved her hands. No, I'm not, don't say things like that. Joseph stepped closer to inspect the rabbit, nodding. Professional work. Have you been practicing for a while? He looked back at Purna. Why are you practicing dissection in the kitchen, of all places? Purna grew nervous at the determination in his voice. The Crown Prince knew anatomy, so she couldn't count on him to let her off the hook. She clasped her hands tightly, hesitated, and then, as if making a final decision, puffed out her chest and declared. Your Highness, yes, I am practicing anatomy. She took a deep breath, as if finally releasing a long-held secret. I believe the current climate is terrible for the development of medicine. For example, women can't study medicine, which is a major setback and unfair to women. I admire my father. I've assisted him in treating patients since I was a child, and it's made me long for the profession of saving lives. I know my father loves me. He even let me dress as a man to help diagnose and treat patients. I'm grateful to him. But he still forbids me from going to the operating table or practicing anatomy, because it would ruin my chances of marriage. No one wants to marry a female doctor. That's the reality. However, I still want to become a doctor who saves patients. I don't have access to corpses, so I can only practice on animals to learn about living organisms. I made a deal with Mr. Wollaston. Late every night, I come here to practice dissection and cut meat for the chefs. He helps me keep it a secret. Her eyes welled up with tears, a sign of the years of struggle she'd endured. She sniffed, her voice calmer. Your Highness, report me. I scared you earlier, and I deserve to be punished. Chapter 29. Become a fangirl in seconds, seeking investment. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Joseph looked at the girl with pity, shaking his head, a heavy feeling settling in his chest. He recalled words from monk Louis, a contemporary author, quoted in Mom's book, I hate, pity, and despise all female writers. They should stick to embroidery needles, not pens. Only embroidery needles are tools they can truly master. Even in 18th century France, the supposed birthplace of enlightenment, women faced severe limitations. They were barred from professions like writing, medicine, and law, and even denied basic rights like having a bank account. Society rigidly confined them to the domestic sphere. As a 21st century man, Joseph naturally rejected this view. Yet, the onlookers stared at Purna with disapproval, seemingly finding it audacious for a woman to aspire to surgery. Even Kisaud wore the same helpless smile he usually reserved for mischievous children. Purna reminded him of his own rebellious sister, who had insisted on studying law, but his smile only deepened Purna's sadness. She was tired of men's condescending smiles. She had briefly imagined that the Crown Prince, praised by Professor Lagrange and possessing extensive medical knowledge, might hold more progressive views. But his captain of the guard's reaction had already shattered her fragile hopes. Surely, the Crown Prince felt the same way. Purna looked up, fighting back tears, only to see the Crown Prince approaching, his voice encouraging. Anatomy is fundamental to medicine. I wholeheartedly support your pursuit of it. Go for it. Purna was stunned, her clear green eyes wide with disbelief. Your Highness. Joseph picked up the scalpel from the ground, smiling warmly. Someone with your ideals and courage is destined to become a great doctor. But I. Purna stammered, caught off guard by the Crown Prince's support. I'm a woman. Do you really believe women can be doctors? Absolutely. Joseph handed the knife back to her and nodded. Medicine is a profession, and women are perfectly capable. If I were ever seriously ill, well, just in case, it's entirely possible that Dr. Purna would be the one to save my life. Given the chance, I'd even advocate for legislation to allow women to practice medicine. Oh, Your Highness. Are you serious? You're not just making fun of me. I assure you, I'm serious. Joseph nodded sincerely. Purna's heart pounded. The Crown Prince, so highborn and influential, supported her dreams. What did she have to fear? Could her dream actually come true? I've never heard anyone say that before. She stared at the Crown Prince, feeling as if she were in a dream. Everything around her faded, and only the Crown Prince shone brightly, like an angel in a Raphael painting, so beautiful and pure. Suddenly, she covered her face and began to sob, releasing years of pent-up frustration in current joy. Thank you, Your Highness. Thank you so much. Hey, why are you crying now? Joseph patted her shoulder. He was about to offer more comfort when his stomach let out a loud rumble. Purna paused, then couldn't help but laugh. Your Highness, were you looking for a midnight snack? Joseph glanced around awkwardly. I was a little hungry, but I couldn't find the chef anywhere. The chef is probably prepping for tomorrow's meals. Joseph knew the chef was most likely asleep, but he didn't call her out. He'd slept in plenty of times himself during late shifts. Your Highness, if you don't want to wait. Purna offered softly, blushing. Maybe I could make you something. She looked at the Crown Prince nervously, afraid he would mock her. That would be wonderful. Joseph nodded happily. Thank you. The palace kitchen fire was always lit, and ingredients were always prepped. Purna took off her dissection apron, washed her hands thoroughly, and began working at the stove. In less than 20 minutes, a plate of red wine braised foie gras, rich with aroma, sat on the chef's tea table, along with a bowl of beet and tomato soup. Kisao dutifully sampled both, and after confirming they were safe, stepped back. Joseph was ravenous. The aroma made his mouth water. He picked up his utensils, ready to dig in, when he noticed Purna standing awkwardly to the side. He gestured for her to join him. Come on, you have to eat too. The girl waved her hands. Thank you, Your Highness, but I'm all right. Please, go ahead. Do you like it? Joseph glanced at the plate of foie gras. Enough for 3. He pulled her down to sit, grabbed another plate, divided the food equally, and said with a smile. How can I let you watch me eat after you put in all this effort? Besides, I can't let France's first female doctor go hungry. Purna's face flushed. She lowered her head and silently picked up her knife and fork. Joseph put a piece of golden brown foie gras and a slice of black truffle into his mouth. The unique richness filled his palate, balanced perfectly by the truffle's earthiness. The crisp skin gave way to the tender, melt-in-your-mouth foie gras. Joseph closed his eyes in enjoyment. Swallowing, he pointed his finger in praise. This is incredible. If you weren't a doctor, you could be a chef. Really? Purna's eyes sparkled. I learned from Mr. Wallister in my free time. Joseph cut off another piece of foie gras, holding it up. To thank you for this meal, I'd like to give you a gift. Oh, no, I'm just happy you like it. I couldn't possibly accept anything. Joseph smiled. Nonsense. The outfit you wore for the anatomy practice was long and impractical. I'll have the tailor make you a special doctor's uniform. It might even become standard nationwide, so think of it as helping me test it out. Purna's face burned crimson. She lowered her head and whispered, Thank you, Your Highness. The next morning, Purna waited for the Crown Prince to wake up. as usual, and carried her medical bag to perform his routine checkup, but unlike before, she hadn't applied dark powder to her face, and her lips were their natural color. Her complexion was fresh and smooth, radiating healthy beauty. She approached Joseph, set down her bag, bowed, and pulled out her medical notes. "Your Highness, is your throat still sore?" "Much better, just a little." "Cough?" "Occasionally, but less frequent." "Any phlegm?" "A little." The girl carefully recorded each detail. Suddenly, she glanced up and caught the handsome lines of Joseph's face. Her heart skipped a beat, and a thought flashed through her mind, the Crown Prince is so handsome. Why haven't I noticed that before? Her face instantly turned red. Chapter 30 Pharmaceutical Factory goes into operation. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Perna finished her checkup in a flash, grabbed her suitcase, and bolted out of the house like a scared rabbit, not even glancing back. Except she did. As soon as she hit the door, she whipped around for one quick peek at the Crown Prince. Joseph watched her go, blinking in surprise. Is she, got a touch of the stomach flu? Meanwhile, back at the South Palace of Versailles, in the Chancellor's office, Brian took the tax bill from Joseph. It was noticeably thinner. He said, sounding doubtful, "Your Highness, it looks like you've cut a lot of taxes." Joseph nodded. "Yep, my doing." Brian quickly scanned the bill, his eyebrows furrowing deeper with each item. Finally, he looked up at Joseph. "Your Highness, are all the clauses you removed the ones that benefited the nobles?" "That's right, Archbishop." Brian set the bill back on the table, shaking his head. "Why would you do that?" Joseph countered. "You think we'll get this bill passed if we keep giving concessions?" Brian shook his head. "Exactly. So, let's try a different angle. We can start by submitting this bill to the High Court first." Brian sighed. "Your Highness, that'll just piss off the nobles, and nothing more." Joseph smiled. "Ever seen a bullfight?" "Bullfighting?" "Yes, Your Highness. The matador always uses the red cloth to rile up the bull. An angry bull loses its head and makes mistakes, giving the matador his chance." Joseph explained. "Let the nobles get angry. It's not a bad thing. Trust me, even if it gets rejected this time, this bill will pass eventually." Brian looked skeptical. "Can you tell me what you're planning?" "Forget reasoning with these people. We hit them head on, divide and conquer, and control public opinion so they have no choice but to cave." Brian was taken aback by the Crown Prince's confident, almost cunning look. He suddenly had a feeling Joseph might actually be on to something. After a moment, Brian nodded and chuckled. "All right, then I'll send this bill to the High Court. But please, don't mention you made these changes. Otherwise, those greedy bastards will definitely hold it against you." "And me? If this bill doesn't go through before the year's end, I'll have to step down as finance minister. In the little time I have left, let's give it a shot. I appreciate your trust." Joseph hadn't expected to win Brian over so quickly. He wasted no time, turning to his assistant. "Contact the biggest newspapers in Paris and reserve prominent ad space. When the High Court rejects the tax bill, we'll immediately publish the first tax item in the paper, with a detailed explanation, who pays it, what impact it has, the whole 9 yards. From then on, publish one tax item each day until the entire bill is out there and fully explained." "Yes, Your Highness." "Also, put together a team of reporters to cover the bill's journey from registration to rejection by the High Court. Don't run the whole story at once, drip feed it to keep the buzz going." "Yes. And one more thing." He kept things humming in the Chancellor's office until noon. Joseph finally wrapped up the preliminary steps for rolling out the tax bill, then grabbed lunch with the Queen. Emin reported that Dr. Lamarck was requesting an audience. Joseph headed back to his living room and found Lamarck pacing anxiously. "Mr. Lamarck, is something up at the pharmaceutical factory?" Lamarck bowed respectfully, nodding. There is something. He looked even more nervous. Your Highness, I heard my daughter offended you last night. She's young, she didn't mean anything by it. Please forgive her. Joseph smiled and waved his hand. Miss Pernot did nothing wrong. I barged into her laboratory uninvited. Oh, and she even treated me to a late-night snack. Thank you for your kindness. Lamarck bowed again, shaking his head and muttering, I really shouldn't have let her study medicine. That girl actually went to the palace kitchen to dissect animals in the middle of the night. Joseph was impressed. Pernot's got real talent. In fact, you could let her practice anatomy at the Royal Laboratory. If you want to keep it quiet, I can have the guards and servants keep it under wraps. I don't know what to say. Lamarck's face lit up with gratitude. You're so open-minded. If the people at the Medical Association were half as understanding, Pernot would have a medical license and be treating patients already. Joseph noticed the glass bottle in his hand. Speaking of which, you mentioned something about the pharmaceutical workshop. Oh, right. Lamarck eagerly handed over the bottle, his excitement returning. That perfume workshop is fantastic. The equipment's complete, even has a water wheel. I only had to buy a few high-precision thermometers and condensers, and that was enough to purify the salicin. And the workers are great, too, skilled, and a lot of them had some experience with purification. These guys made this last night, without any input from Mr. Larcini or me. Joseph examined the beige powder, nodding with satisfaction. How much do you think you can produce? Lamarck considered for a moment. If the raw materials hold up, we should be able to do about 2,500 grams a day. Once the workers get really good at it, we can probably double that. Great. That should be enough for all the patients in Paris, and enough to send some to the other provinces, Joseph replied. For medicinal purposes, around 5 grams of salicin is taken daily to reduce inflammation and fever. With a population of over 500,000 in Paris, 10,000 doses per day should do it, Lamarck nodded. Your Highness, Mr. Larcini and I estimated that each pill, containing 25 grams of salicin, costs about 3 to 4 deniers to make. We'll sell them for 5 deniers at first, and adjust later based on income and expenses. What do you think of that price? Since 1 livre equals 20 sous, and 1 sou equals 12 deniers, 1 livre can buy 48 pills, which is definitely a steal. It's your call. Then Joseph remembered his angel water and said to Lamarck, oh, and one more thing, Mr. Lamarck, I'm going to need you to purify 300 grams of high-purity salicin for me every day, and try to keep it as impurity-free as possible. A little over 1 gram of salicin is needed for every 200-gram bottle of skincare product. 300 grams can produce over 200 bottles a day, which should be sufficient for initial testing. Lamarck didn't hesitate. No problem, Your Highness. That same night, as Joseph and Lamarck were talking shop about the pharmaceutical factory, Patriot Party leader Dendels was greeting French guests in Amsterdam, Netherlands, some 250 miles away from Paris.